Well, well, well. They said it couldn't be done. Do you believe in miracles? Yes. The Buffalo Sabres made a trade today. An actual trade, a legit trade that sent shockwaves through the NHL. I don't know what this. I'm actually still kind of shocked by it. I'm shocked that it happened just randomly on a Friday at 5:00.
Yeah, I was too. Right before arbitration deals or arbitration decisions, files were due. Like it was like I was just at work after 4th of July. Then all of a sudden it's Sabres news left and right for the last hour of my day. I'm like, okay, I'll take it. I'll take it.
It's been a long time coming. We deserve this. It's been a very, very depressing and a very bad time to be on the Bird app as a Sabres fan. And actually, funny story. So I was thinking to myself, I'm like, I think it would be funny if I just went on the main account and just tweeted like, hey, say something you're excited about heading into next season. Just spread some positivity. And I go onto the app, and I kid you not, I scroll up, and at the top of my Twitter timeline, 3 seconds ago from Elliot Friedman, Ryan McLeod is being traded from Edmonton to Buffalo. And I was like, oh, well, can't do that.
Yeah, the hockey gods didn't want you to do that, clearly.
No, they stepped in. But it's about time. It's about time that something was injected to this roster to, at the very least, make it better now. Because at the very least, I think we can all agree that the Sabres right now are a better hockey team than they were when we all woke up this morning.
100%. This move makes us a lot better in many different ways. And it's just, I think all of us can at least feel a lot better. I mean, this morning, I'm assuming a lot of people saw Jay Fresh's standing predictions where we were projected for 82 points?
82 points.
Yeah, and we were like, oh my God, like, it's really not going to change. And we could all feel a lot better about how the roster looks today.
Before we go any further into dissecting this trade, welcome back to this emergency edition of the Sabre Roundtable. My name is Jonah.
And I'm JP.
And as always, we'll be talking to you about all things Buffalo Sabres hockey. And today, that has to do with the Ryan McLeod trade to the Buffalo Sabres. No Christian today, unfortunately. He's out of town. He was driving. He sent us his thoughts on the deal, or at least his own personalized thoughts on the fan base's reaction to the deal, but I can't share that. It got, I'm sure you can assume why. His rhetoric towards the fan base
wasn't PG.
It was not PG, so we'll keep that in the vault, but JP and I are going to get into it here because a lot of this trade has to do with how, it's like I said, it sent shockwaves through the NHL. We're basically in cottage season, meaning the offseason is basically about to come to a halt. I wouldn't be surprised if this was the last big move before the NHL kind of slows down, but I could be wrong. But like Pierre LeBrun tweeted the other night that, from his cottage, thanking everybody for a great season. And at that moment, we're all like, well, that settles that. Looks like the Sabres are done for the summer.
Kevin had to cook. He was like, I'm not done.
We thank the fan that screamed at him yesterday.
Yes. That was all you.
Clearly, yep.
Hope you're listening. That was all you. Good job.
Motivated Kevin to get a trade done. If it wasn't for that, Ryan McLeod would not be a Sabre.
Yeah. We could quickly touch on that if we want. Joe and I were actually at the 3-on-3 tournament yesterday. Mm-hmm. We didn't tweet anything, nothing too crazy. But it was cool. We were surprised on how many people there actually were.
Yeah, it was pretty packed. I know it was a holiday, but I didn't think this, the city was in any mood to go watch some prospects, especially considering none of the big guns were really there.
Yeah.
Besides Hellenius and like Victor Nuchev. But good experience. Good.
Yeah.
Always fun to go to those things.
It was cool.
So yeah, back to the trade. So to get right into it, the Buffalo Sabres acquire forward Ryan McLeod and forward Tyler Tullio from the Edmonton Oilers for prospect Matthew Savoie. Give me your initial thoughts and upon seeing that deal, JP.
My initial thoughts were, well, this seems like a little bit of an overpayment, but it addresses a need, and it fills our roster right now. We were literally talking this morning about Ellers and which prospect we'd rather trade, and I said how I value Savoie highly, but I think he's the one to go. He's kind of redundant in our prospect pipeline and our roster right now, and he's another small forward, and Benson is already like our small forward on the team. So I wasn't surprised at all that Savoie was probably the prospect that they were shopping around this entire time. So I really wasn't too surprised that did end up being the package. I was initially shocked, but I think it's a good move. And then as you know, we dove deeper into it and saw some of the analytics, it made me feel even better about it.
Yeah, when I first saw it, of course I know who Ryan McLeod is, and I knew in my mind, I'm like, okay, yeah, like he's a solid player, but I didn't know right off the top. I'm like, is he the one that there was kind of question marks about just because he got a lot of time with Draisaitl, or was that Foegele? I couldn't really remember, but then digging into it, looking at some of the advanced numbers, like this is a good player, and he spent a lot of time away from Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. Now he would get thrown onto the wing with Draisaitl every now and then. I think he was on there during the playoffs. I think when they were down 3-0, they threw him up there just to get a different look.
Yep.
But no, this is a guy, like this is their third line center. Like for the Edmonton Oilers, they got to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals. This was their guy to take on the lower of the lineup assignments. Now I know they were playing McDavid and Draisaitl like 30 minutes a night, but this was the guy they trusted with those other minutes, and for the most part, he won those minutes. I'll give credit to at Bushbombs on Twitter, and he tweeted, Ryan McLeod in 1,367 minutes without Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, and Evan Bouchard at 5v5 for the past 3 years. He's got a goals for percentage of 54%, a Corsi for percentage of 51%, and an expected goal share of 53%. And this is an Edmonton fan. At the end of the tweet, he says, you absolutely do not trade a 23-year-old player who can do that at 5v5 away from our best players. I mean, think about it from Edmonton's point of view. Like, this has been their problem the last few years. Like, when Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl come off the ice, they don't have much. But they did have Ryan McLeod. Now, as we'll get into, he's not a scorer, and that's kind of the reason their bottom six struggled. They really didn't have those in the bottom of their lineup. But for a team like the Sabres, who desperately needed a third-line center with more two-way upside than what someone like Casey Middlestat could provide, I guess I'll hesitate to call it a slam dunk edition, but it's a no doubt. Like, you do that. You have to do that. And it's funny, when the trade first broke, because all that Elliot Friedman sent out was Ryan McLeod is headed from Edmonton to Buffalo. And I was seeing Edmonton fans being like, what? Like, what are we doing? And then when they saw they got Savoie, the narrative quickly shifted into, oh my God, we got one of the top prospects in the NHL for a third line center. But they know, like, he's a good player for them and has been. And from what I was reading, he's a little frustrating at times. It seems like he's one of those guys that they always felt like there was more to pull out of him, but he just was never able to put it together. But they were upset to see him go at first, and until they got hooked onto the return.
Yeah, and that's what reaffirmed me the most as I looked more into it. I mean, he was the third line center on the Stanley Cup runner-ups who made it to a Game 7. And not only that, he's like one of the best penalty killers in the league. He was their top penalty killer. I believe He was not on the ice for a power play goal in the Stanley Cup Finals.
Their penalty kill was lethal throughout the playoffs. Like Florida had, I think they had a few. When they went up 3-0, they had 2 power play goals, and then I don't think they scored one the rest of the series. And like I know penalty kill, like a lot of it's structure, and we know that as Sabres fans, like a lot of it, you have good penalty killers, but you don't know what to do with them. But yeah, like looking at Jay Fresh's model, he's in the 98th percentile over a 3-year weighted average. Like he's a phenomenal penalty killer.
Yeah, I believe there's only 2 forwards better at him. That's the one tweet
I
that
think
was sent in our group chat.
I think it was in terms of, I think in
PK Gar, right?
in evolving hockey's goals above replacement model, I think only Rope Hintz and who was the other player? It was one other player. They were the only 2 that had a higher goals above replacement than him. So it's just another asset that he brings to the team, and they're going to need that. It was Yanni Gourde and Rope Hintz, the only 2 forwards that have more penalty kill goals above replacement. Or you can just think about it as WAR. Like only 2 forwards have more penalty kill WAR than Ryan McLeod over the past 3 years. It's Yanni Gourde and Rope Hintz. That's it. And with the departure of Zemgus Girgensons and even Kyle Okposo and who knows what happens with Peyton Krebs from here, they're gonna need that. And it's another nice asset that he brings to the team.
Yeah, and the one thing that we haven't touched on yet that is probably one of the main reasons why we targeted him and this type of player. He's one of, if not he's one of the fastest players in the league. He is incredibly fast. That's one of his big points. Like I was watching a highlight reel, and a ton of them were just him using his speed and getting around guys. And that's probably one of the reasons why he was so successful with the Oilers at times. He could actually keep up with McDavid.
Yes, he could. Credit to Jay Fresh for this next tweet. Skating speed percentile for the Sabres' bottom 6 acquisitions. So it's a mix of their top speed plus the amount of 20-plus mile-per-hour bursts. And this is from the NHL Edge, which is the NHL's personal tracking system for players in the league. McLeod's in the 100th percentile. Aube-Kubel's in the 98th. Lafferty's in the 97th. And Malenstein's in the 96th.
It's just a clear point of emphasis that Kevin and probably Lindy had this entire offseason was getting faster. Think about the players we had last year compared to now. Like our 4th line last year, Okposo, there's a slow guy. Skinner is legit one of the slower players in the league.
Even Zach Benson, he is one of the slower players in the NHL. Zemgus was a quicker player, but Peyton Krebs has never been a burner. And, Victor Olofsson was never a straight line speed player. Tyson Jost, same thing. They were guys, they made sense for the bottom 6, but we talked about this last episode. Like, this is the final mark of Kevin Adams on this bottom 6 in terms of, building an identity. Like, the other guys, sure, they're quick, they have defensive responsibility, but this solidifies that. Now you have a third-line center, a proven third-line center who did it in the playoffs, who's done it for one of the best teams in the NHL, who's 24 years old. He's cost-controlled. You have him as an RFA. He's got 1 year left on his deal going into next season. And, it makes so much sense. And you get why Savoie was the return when you start breaking down those things. The more you get into McLeod as a player, you realize, hey, yeah, you wouldn't want to give this guy up for nothing.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I was initially taken back by, that he only had 1 year left on his deal. But then I realized he's only 24. We still have years of control with him.
He's 24 years old.
You're paying for years of control with Savoie with that. You're probably going to have him for at least the next 4 years, I would say. At least.
I think that's a fair estimation. He has 1 year left at $2.1 million. And then he's an RFA. I'm trying to see if he's arbitration eligible. Actually, no, he is. He's arbitration eligible. So, you cross that bridge when you get there. But that's the thing. This isn't a... I'm trying to... a third line center that we've been talking about, like someone like, I don't know, like a Dylan Strome, like a dream acquisition. Like, is he a better player than Ryan McLeod? Yeah, he is. Also cost $5 million. McLeod cost you $2 million.
And he's younger.
And he's younger. And look, I have no idea. We spent a lot of time on it last episode if they're going to spend to the cap, and they better. But if their intentions still are that, and I hope to God they are, you just got a third line center for $2 million. $2 million. I'm really liking this ad the more we get into it. And another thing I was thinking about is everybody's been so wrapped up in the top 6 forward addition. Like, everybody wants that. And it's absolutely, it's the most important thing. I guess it's less important now. We'll get into that. But it was the most important thing. But if you looked at the Sabres center depth going into today, there were question marks all over it.
Krebs is your third line center.
Going from the bottom to the top. Okay, Sam Lafferty, bounced around center and wing. He's not a bona fide fourth line center, but you'll survive with him. But he's nothing special. You go to third line center. You have Peyton Krebs, someone who hasn't shown the ability to be a third line center, and I want him to. And maybe there's a chance he still can be, and maybe it's for the Sabres, maybe it's not. I think it's less likely now that this trade has been made. He was lining up to be your third line center after not showing any ability to. And then you get to Dylan Cousins as your second line center, who's coming off probably the worst season of his career, at least the most disappointing at the very least. And Tage Thompson, who I'll defend. Like, I'll absolutely defend him. I still think he had a great season, given the injuries and given everything and the defensive improvements he made. But even then, like, his production, it took a step back. So you have questions about every single center on that roster, conceivably. Then you throw in Ryan McLeod. And at the very least, you have one bona fide good player who's gearing up to play in the right role. Like, it's not like he's being placed as like the second line center. That's not what's happening. He's the third line center. And it makes the rest of the lineup already look 1,000 times better. Because now your third line is gearing up to be McLeod and possibly like Zucker and Greenway, for example. And that's just so much. I think that's a huge improvement over like Middlestat, Greenway, and Benson, at least a rookie Benson. I don't know. Like, you have a bottom 6 now, like a legitimate bottom 6. Zucker was kind of like if he was thrown into the bottom 6, he was the piece where it's like, okay, he's the best player in this bottom 6. Is he good? Yeah, he's good, but can he kind of carry it? No, not really. Ryan McLeod can carry that bottom 6, I think.
Yeah, that's one of the things. Like, if we were to go back, a few weeks, what were pretty much the two biggest needs of our offseason? It was a top 6 winger, and there was even pre-Skinner where you're saying a top 6 winger and a third line center, and they just got their third line center. Like, it has been completely overlooked these past few weeks, or the past week, I guess, that we still needed a third line center. Like, Krebs is gearing up to be our third line center, and it makes me feel so much better about the bottom 6. I mean, when was the last time we went into a season with a good third line?
I mean, I think conceivably, like Middlestat, Greenway, Benson was doing very well at the start of last year, and it gave them a forechecking line. I think it's more so, when's the last time you've gone in feeling good about their bottom 6? I guess you could have argued last year, but because here's what I was thinking. The Buffalo Sabres have not had, I guess, an identity since I can't even remember. At least a team structural identity, except for 2022, 2023. That team was, we're just going to score goals. We are the rush offense team. That is our identity. So that was their identity, set in stone. Last year, they really didn't have one. And in 2021, 2022, it wasn't even an identity. It was more so like, we're just going to be competitive. We're going to be a workhorse type team, I guess, if you want to call it an identity. And then going back to the Eichel years, like, you never had one. Absolutely, you never had one.
No.
So it goes back to the last Lindy Ruff team. You have an identity for part of your lineup now, and one of the probably the part of the lineup where you need an identity. Like, hey, what is the Sabres bottom six? You know what it is now. They're fast, they're going to be physical, and they're going to be responsible in their own zone. That is the goal. That is what Kevin Adams has built them to be. It's the first time where I can look at a cohesive unit that Kevin Adams has had a full hand in building and be like, you know what? I feel good about that. I feel good. It has an identity. Maybe it doesn't work out, but it should work out when I look at it right now.
And why I like that identity for the bottom six even more is I feel like it does go with our top six identity too, and how we're such a rush offense. Like, we are going to be one of, if not the fastest team in the league next year. I mean, we have speed. We've already talked about the bottom six, but Tage is fast. Tuck is fast. Paterka and Cousins, that's two of their assets. Like, we just have a fast we have a fast forward group now. It's a clear identity, and they're finally, going towards it. They're embracing it.
And it kind of shocked me. I forget who tweeted it out, and I really apologize because I want to say it was somebody on Sabres Twitter. Somebody pointed it out that the Sabres, I think if you were going by 20-mile-per-hour bursts off of NHL Edge, they were the slowest team in hockey, which still kind of surprised me. Like, I didn't feel like they should have been the slowest team. But I do, I'm sure that wasn't the case the year before. Your Tage was dealing with a leg thing. Tuck was dealing with a leg thing. Quinn was out for a large part of the season. And I don't know, Cousins never really looked full throttle, but still, like, it still surprised me. Like you said, that's not going to be the case this year, and it's certainly not going to be the case when you add in the fact that, reasonably, your guys that were hurt last year are going to be healthy. I'm just very happy that I think no matter what, you can at least see that this team has an identity, and I think I will commend Adams for that. Will it work? Who knows? And I don't think he should be done. Okay, and I think you could conceivably look at this roster. I think you can look at it's built right now, and think like, hey, they could be, if they wanted to be done, they could be. I really hope they don't do that. But the reason I say that they could be done is their forward group looks pretty good right now. The big risk you're taking, if you look at the forward group, how it's constructed right now, it seems like Zach Benson is lining up to be their second line left wing. And it's not quite the same, but it does sort of give me Levi vibes from last year, where it's like, okay, like, if you're pegging him to be your second line left wing, I love Zach Benson, and he has a much better chance of thriving in a higher role than Levi did, mostly because he's got a full NHL season under his belt, but that still might be a little bit early for him to take that jump, and I think you might be better off if you go out and get a top six forward still. But I can look at this forward group and be like, I feel decent about it. I'm not in love with it, but like it excites me. I look at it, I'm like, I feel good. Like, if that was the opening night lineup, I would feel like that's a good forward group, I think. If you're taking in, because if we talk about that Jay Fresh model for a second, like 82 points, do I think that's low? I do, because I don't think it doesn't take into account like bounce back seasons from Cousins and a breakout like Jack Quinn is, I think, who's going to have one, and guys who are down in the model, somebody like Bowen Byram, if they have a good season. And I think there's things that model doesn't take into account, but I still feel like they probably capped out as like an 85-point team. I look at this model right now, I think this is an 87, 88-point team with the ceiling of something higher. So it's like I said, they got better today. They got better, and that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to look at the lineup right now, we pretty much have 13 forwards right now, maybe 14 if I'm counting wrong. So it leads me to believe that there's still more to come, because first of all of these players cannot make the roster. You can't have all 14 of these guys. and it was Krebs' spot, the third line center. Where does he go now? Like Kevin Adams already talked about how he sees Lafferty as a fourth line center. Now, do I think Krebs would probably be better than him as a fourth line center? Yeah, maybe. But I just feel like there's not a place for Krebs anymore. It's either or Greenway. Like I feel like one of those two is gonna be moved out. Like I just don't see both of them being on this lineup with these moves that we've made.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it was interesting because at that press conference, Kevin Adams said something for the first time, maybe
In a while.
I feel like since Peyton Krebs has gotten into the NHL, they've had him as a center, and I think deservedly so. He has the skill set of a center, but he mentioned moving him to the wing, and I think there's still a possibility he's here on opening. There's a huge possibility he's still here on opening night, but I mean, you can look at this. Peyton Krebs lost his spot. He lost his spot in the lineup. You got the GM talking to the media about how he's going to maybe change positions, mostly because they don't have a solidified spot for him anymore. It's going to be interesting. I mean, maybe he plays the season out with the Sabres. He's probably not in their long-term plans as I'm speaking on it right now. Or at least like even in like the short-term plans. I mean, we'll see what contract he gets, but he's probably a very tradable asset for them right now.
Yeah, and he hasn't been too good on the wing when he has played his small minutes there. That's why he's played so much as a center. And like at least like last year and even before this trade, if Krebs were to grow into the player that everybody thought he would be a very good third line center for us. There's no room for him to grow anymore as a center on this team. Like he can't go up. It's either he's like our fourth line center or he's our like third line winger. So there's no room for him to grow. I think it just makes so much sense that he might not be here. And like you said, Kevin has never mentioned him being on the wing before. Like even
we could be wrong, but going off of my memory, I don't recall him saying that.
Yeah, like even going into this offseason, he talked about how Krebs could be that third line center for us. And now he's talking about him as a winger. So it is a complete change of narrative. And maybe it's because he knew he was going to make this move or a similar sort of move.
When they made the trade, because like I said, I was sort of wondering was it him or Fogle that was the winger that played a lot with Draisaitl. I'm sure some people knew that off the top of their heads, but for me, it was a bit fuzzy. I thought they were done. Like I thought this was their top six ad, but this is their third line center, and I don't know. I would really like, we've been saying like, hey, give us one move.
Now we're begging for another.
I'm still hungry for another because I feel like even if Ehlers is the dream addition, but from all intents and purposes, the cost is exorbitant from Winnipeg. I don't know if it's going to happen. I feel like the only thing that's going to bring it down is if Ehlers were like to request a trade out of there formally. We'll see. But even if it's like a Joel Farabee or I don't know, a Travis Konechny or someone, a Trevor Zegras, I would feel like even if they just get one guy there, just one more addition, I would feel complete with this lineup.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's room for it. If you move out Krebs and slide down Benson, and your third line's like Benson, McLeod, and Zucker, that's a good third line. That is such a good third line. Yeah. And if your bottom line is Greenway, Malenstein, Lafferty, and Aube-Kubel, like if that's your fourth line mix, that's good. Like that's really good. That is really good.
Yeah,
the other thing is, as the roster's built right now, there's not really a path to the roster for Yuri Kulik. And I know some fans won't have a problem with that. I don't know how much more there is for him to learn at the AHL level. He's not a perfect player, and he hasn't torn up that league. And maybe they want one season like Quinn and Peterka where he explodes. And probably the same thing with Roseanne. But I don't know. I don't know if he's ever going to be like that. And I think that's okay. I really do think that's okay, especially if they want to fix their power play woes. He could really help with that. And I wouldn't really be scared about playing him in the bottom six if you had to. So I do wonder what they do there, but we'll see. We'll see what their plan is. You know what? Kevin Adams proved to us today. You know, a trade, it can go down at any time, I suppose. But even then, I would still expect it's going to get quiet really soon here.
Yeah, it is. It will be interesting with Kulik, because I think you can still make the argument that there's a pathway for him as a winger. Maybe this is a little extreme, and maybe he slots in as a second line guy if they thinks he can make that step. I don't think he should be. But if they don't make another move, I think it can be very likely that he has a good chance to make this team, especially like you said, to help our power play. But just imagine if we were to go get a top six winger, and I don't think it'll be Ehlers anymore. I feel like Adams really goes with guys that we don't talk about.
Today
So
proves that.
yeah, that's what I mean. Like he doesn't all the energies right now going towards Ehlers in the Sabres community. I just if he makes a trade, I think it's going to be someone we haven't barely been talking about. But imagine what our lineup would look like if we got a top six player. Like it would
Probably be their most. It'd probably be their most complete forward lineup since 2007.
Yeah, like it would just be a complete change.
Maybe in the years after, like the few seasons after, but the last few teams Lindy had, they were very Ryan Miller dependent. They're still good teams, but they were very Ryan Miller dependent. This would be your deepest team since those years. And if you got a top six forward, I think they're a playoff team. Like legitimately, I still have questions about the defense because we can get into.
Yeah.
They re-signed Henry Jokiharju. I'm not the biggest fan of that addition. I know, speaking for Christian, I know he's not, but the forward group is infinitely more important to me. You can get in with, you can still, like Henry Jokiharju being re-signed does not torpedo their chances at the playoffs next year. A top six forward might be the difference. That might be the difference between them getting in and them missing.
If they were to do that, I mean, that would be a legit playoff lineup. I mean, not cup contending, but a legit playoff lineup. So I don't know. I'm craving for it, but we'll see what happens. And before we move to the other side of the trade, the one thing that I did find interesting and I connected the dots is Kevin in his latest press conference when he was asked, are you done? Are you going to make more moves? He said how, sometimes teams get a player they don't think they're going to get, and now they have a player that's expendable. And I think this is pretty similar to what happened now. Like, I believe the Oilers picked up someone else. And
I wonder who for a similar cap hit.
Yeah, and they didn't need him anymore. So I find it interesting because Kevin has always been very honest with the media. And I think that was something that was always in the back of my mind, that he might be looking to make more moves now because other teams have filled their needs and they have more expendable players.
Yeah, it's the one point I will be willing to defend Adams on, and I can defend it now because he made a trade. And we were just talking about with Ehlers. Like, I still recognized, like, it's clear, okay, teams are trying to take advantage of the Sabres, or like their costs are higher. Like, was Ryan McLeod going to go for any other team's top prospect? Maybe they could have, because we'll get into the Savoie conversation because league-wide perception looks to be lower than what we thought, but they looked at. I would be very interested to know who initiated trade talks here. I would be, but Kevin Adams, I think, has been dealing with a really tough market, and we learned that with the Ehlers stuff, how supposedly they're asking for 4 pieces, 3 of which being first-round caliber. It's tough to make a trade, but for me, it didn't matter. Like, you had to find a deal, and he found one today, and we saw it. It took a big hit. I mean, no matter what Savoie is perceived as by the rest of the league, he's still a top prospect. He still is. It's just how high of a caliber is he? But they had to give that up to get a Ryan McLeod, to get a quality third-line center. So getting a top 6 forward, it's not easy, but it's something you have to navigate. You have to find that trade that nobody was expecting. And, we'll see. Like JP said, when the dust settles, these teams that are up against the cap, what are they going to have to move to get under it? What are they going to have to export out of their system, and because we can provide cost-controlled prospects that are high-end. That's the allure of. You just traded Matthew Savoie. You still have Yuri Kulik, Isaac Roseanne, Noah Ostlund, Konsta Anton Wahlberg. Yep. You have all these other players, and you got the other guys in the system that are still coming up. You have all of that, and I think teams are going to find that attractive if they need to get rid of a piece to help their own roster construction out. They're going to come to the Sabres. I think. I can only hope. But it's going to be different, like in a trade like the Ehlers trade. Winnipeg doesn't have to make that deal.
That's why I don't think they will.
Yeah, unless
they're still good.
Unless Ehlers kills his own value, they're still good, or at least they still think they're good. And Ehlers is probably gone no matter what after next season from Winnipeg. They might be like, hey, who cares? We're gonna get every ounce of contract out of you. So that's a type of trade where it's like it's almost impossible because they just don't care. But if a team goes to Kevin Adams, or at least they come to a mutual understanding that, hey, we can help each other out, then that's the trade that you can look for. So, yeah, I wonder, is there a top six forward that is maybe, I don't know, on the move out of there? I don't know. That's for Kevin Adams to find out.
And there's not many teams that are willing to give away a top six forward. I mean, they're not easy to come by.
It's true. Like, how many teams, like what teams are giving away top six forwards?
That are trying to compete pretty much.
That also trying to, like, guess what? Good teams have good players. They don't want to trade those good players for prospects. It sucks. You have to find the trade. You have to find the team that is willing to do that, and it can be incredibly tough to convince them. But you still have to do it. And I think Kevin Adams was able to do that today. Like I said, I'd be interested to know who initiated talks, but it probably took some convincing.
Well, let's get into the other side of the trade.
Let's get into the other side.
As much as we're talking this up,
fan
reaction isn't all like that.
We're excited. I see all the upside with this move. And one last thing, like we really haven't talked about Ryan McLeod, like production wise. This past season, career season, 12 goals, 30 points. So from the outside looking in, people are like, this is a random third line center that just got traded for a top prospect. But it's times like these where you really do appreciate like advanced stats and even the opinions of opposing fan bases where they're going to miss this player. They might be happy with what they got. They're still going to miss him because they think he's good. And look, Ryan McLeod, 30-point player, third line center, who he only averaged 14 minutes a game last season. He didn't get any power play time because Edmonton never took their top group off the ice. And they shouldn't have. It's probably one of the best power plays ever assembled. But he didn't get power play time. Who knows what he can maybe do with that here? I think you are absolutely looking at a forward with 50-point upside. But back to the other point of the conversation. So if you were to go on Twitter right now, the Sabres are getting blasted for this move. Absolutely
league-wide.
Blasted league-wide. When I say this trade sent shockwaves, people are, to put it lightly, baffled. Baffled that the Sabres made this trade. To put it into context, how about Matt Larkin? Matt Larkin of the Daily Faceoff. The Savoie trade has Philip Forsberg for Martin Erat vibes. My jaw is on the floor. And that tweet has like 1,500 likes. A lot of people are agreeing with that in the comments. Like, people are shocked by this move on a wider scale. And to that, I understand. Like I said, Ryan McLeod from the outside looking in, 30-point third-line center, being traded for someone who's still regarded as one of the top prospects in hockey. I get that. I get that on a national scale, and that's going to continue until, maybe they're right. Maybe they're right in the end. Maybe it was a big mistake, or Savoie never pans out to what he's going to be. I understand why the rest of the league is clowning on the Sabres and criticizing them. But what I can't understand is why Sabres fans are like a very large portion are very upset at this move. Like, this is the final straw. Like, people are calling for Adams' head. And, like, I'm not exaggerating. A lot of people have done that today.
Yeah, it's pretty baffling. We've been calling for a trade for the last week, for the past month, and he finally makes like a impactful trade. This isn't a random trade like the Beck Malenstein trade. This is an impactful trade, and we all realized that we were gonna have to overpay a little, and now it happens, and like half the fan base is upset that we gave up Savoie. And I love Savoie, but I mean, you got to do what you got to do.
I understand if, because of course there's going to be big Savoie fans out there. If they're like, man, that stinks. I see what the Sabres are doing, but man, that really stinks to see him go. That's one thing. Like, if you're calling for Kevyn Adams' job, or you're like, you think the Sabres got fleeced, I really don't see the logic behind that. Even if you think the Oilers got the better end of it, the Sabres, like, this is not, what would be a Philip Forsberg for Martin Erat trade? If the Sabres traded Matthew Savoie for Scott Lawton.
Ugh.
That would be that type of trade. Ryan McLeod is a 24-year-old center with legitimate two-way upside who just, as we said, was the third-line center for the team that just went to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final and has done a lot of good stuff away from their best players. That is not Martin Erat. He was like 32 years old when he got traded for Forsberg. I don't know. I'm a little taken aback. Like, it's a large number of people that were really, really upset. And I think this goes into a wider conversation about Savoie himself. Fan perception of him, league-wide, and even in the own Sabres fan base, people think this guy is going to be a bona fide top-line stud. And the potential is still absolutely there for him. Absolutely. But I think the worst thing for Matthew Savoie was the fact that he was a small, undersized forward with black hair playing for the Buffalo Sabres. Because from night one, everybody was like, oh, look, it's the new Danny Briere. And I think people have put that into their heads and combine that with the fact that he tore up the WHL, which he should have been doing in any ways. Like, it's not like he had underwhelming seasons, but he was doing what he should have done in the WHL. It wasn't like historic stuff. It's funny how Savoie's stock kind of rose in the fan base where Kulik's fell after a bad playoff showing, when if you swap the leagues, I don't think their performances change. Like, how many goals is Yuri Kulik scoring in the WHL in his D+2 season? He's scoring 60 to 70 goals.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
He's tearing up that league. So I think I think Savoie is able to look better by playing with lower competition, whereas someone like Yuri Kulik is playing up to playing up in competition. He's playing people that are better than him. And Savoie he's a player who has produced a ton in the WHL. Okay, he had in 183 regular season WHL games, he had 263 points. That's fantastic. And in his short AHL stint last year, he had 5 points in 6 games. So, like, a good showing. That's a guy with obviously potential. But like, even for the Memorial Cup and his playoff run with the Moose Jaw Warriors this year, he wasn't the best player on that team. It was Jagger Firkus. Savoie wasn't even on their first line until I think they were on the brink of elimination when they decided to top load that top line. And they more so had the ability to because they had been playing well and because Jagger Firkus had been carrying that team. But Savoie wasn't even the guy for that playoff run. Like, he had good playoff numbers, but he was like slightly over point per game. He wasn't at his regular season totals. So I think because you're able to see Kulik a lot more because he plays in the AHL and Savoie plays in the West Coast. A lot of people don't see that. They just see highlights. And if you see a Matthew Savoie highlight, he's just going to be whipping past a poor 18-year-old who's going to get drafted in like the 7th round. Whereas Kulik is playing against men and he has to fight for every goal a lot more. Now, look, I still think they're two prospects in the same tier of one another. I do. But Savoie is not in a tier above someone like Yuri Kulik. Absolutely not. I'll stand by that. So I think a lot of people have this idea that he is like this bona fide, almost Macklin Celebrini-esque tier prospect, or like a Will Smith, like coming into this league and everybody knows he's going to be a top line player. I don't have those. Like, I'm not as confident in that. There's no definite answer for Matthew Savoie, in my opinion.
And he projects more to be a winger in the NHL, where a lot of people are thinking he would be our center solution come the future. He's probably going to be a winger. And this isn't to talk him down. He's an incredible prospect. He's probably, arguably, you could argue he's the best prospect in our pipeline. I would say he's definitely top 3 along with Kulik. But I do find it interesting how the narrative of him has changed so much. And I think this trade and him moving is a product of the environment around him and some circumstances that he can't control. I mean, last year he was tearing it up and then he got hurt at development camp. And then his teammate, who his line mate actually, steps over him, starts on the NHL team, and just everybody like forgets about him. And it's like, you can't knock Savoie for playing so good with Benson, but even coming into that year, people were like, he was very good, but he's not even the best player on his line. And it's tough because he's such a good prospect, but the product around him, there wasn't a clear path to him. And plus, what could have really affected his stock is the stupid WHL rule where he couldn't come to the AHL, where he was subjected to another year down in the WHL to play above competition when he should be here. That probably did not help him at all.
And it's no fault of his own.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, he was playing on a loaded, once he got traded to Moose Jaw, he was playing on a loaded team and playing against players he was already better than. Whereas Kulik was, like I said, fighting for each and every point in the AHL. And Zach Benson was playing 71 games in the NHL. He got leapfrogged, and I think people overlook that. And even put it this way: compare Matthew Savoie to Noah Ostlund. Compare their World Juniors this year. Mm-hmm. Ostlund should have won MVP. Savoie had 1 point in 4 games. Okay,
yeah.
And I defended him a lot when he didn't make the team in 2023, even though Team Canada went on to win. They had Connor Bedard and like Dylan Gunther on that team. They were a stacked team despite not taking Savoie. And I think Team Canada, they still held against them. He went to go play in the USHL during COVID. I think that's why he didn't make that team, but he didn't make that, he wasn't so good that they just couldn't take him off. He was still a player that they can conceivably go without with. And we saw they won the whole thing. But that's not the big thing. That's minor. This year's performance, 1 point in 4 games, where even Ostlund probably raised his stock above him around the NHL, or at least they got closer. The gap closed.
Yeah, and we talked about after the World Juniors how Ostlund is more of the guy that we want to keep now, and we were talking about how Savoie's probably the guy on the way out because of how good Benson was playing and how good of a World Juniors that Ostlund have.
I'll bring up this. There was an article going around back by The Athletic, and it was Corey Pronman, Scott Wheeler. I think they were surveyed about where teams, what was the most valuable pieces of their system. When they got to the Sabres, this is what each of them had to say. So Scott Wheeler says, excluding the Sabres timeline / context, I think I'd go with the following based purely on value league-wide. First, he says the most valuable thing in their system was 11th overall. This was prior to the draft. They said 11th overall was the most valuable piece in their system. Then it was Yuri Kulik. Then it was Matthew Savoie. And then it was Noah Ostlund. Corey Pronman also put 11th overall at number 1. And then at number 2, he put a tie, Noah Ostlund and Yuri Kulik. And at number 3, he put Matthew Savoie. Those guys are well informed. And I don't think it's a mistake that even back then we were hearing about, or not hearing about, but it was being hinted at that Savoie wasn't as highly regarded as I think most fans would put him. And I think it's based off of subpar World Junior performances and the fact he was in the WHL in his D+2 season. And look, unfortunately, he's 5'9". He's 5'9". It's an obstacle that it still matters. Like you shouldn't disregard a prospect because of that. But he's 5'9". There's not a lot of 5'9" star forward. There's not a lot of 5'9" top six forwards in the NHL these days. You know, a lot of them, they're big. They are. It's unfortunate. We've gotten to the point in NHL history where it's no longer like it used to be, where the big guys, where they were power forwards, forechecking, and they're hitting people and getting grindy goals, and the small guys were finesse. Look at Tage Thompson. Look at even like Dylan Cousins. Like these guys are monsters, and they play a finesse game. That's how the NHL is these days. Matthew Savoie is not special. He's not there to break the mold. And when I say he's not special, I mean like he's not new in terms of what he brings to the table. He's still insanely gifted, insanely talented. It's just still he has a lot of steps to climb before he becomes a top six forward in the NHL, and before he even becomes an NHL forward. Another thing about Savoie. Here's the thing about his play style. Matthew Savoie and Zach Benson, small undersized forwards, but they play very different games. And there's a reason I think that Zach Benson got to the NHL first. Most importantly, he's an incredibly smart player. Incredibly smart. But those two players use their size differently, or at least treat it differently. Zach Benson picks his spots. And he is a very methodical player, or he's gonna go for, I don't want to call it the safe play, but he's gonna try and open something up that wasn't there by try to utilizing the space that's given to him to create a passing lane or to create just continue to create possession in whatever zone he's in. Matthew Savoie uses his explosiveness whenever he can. And what I mean by that is he tries to just blow past teams, or he tries to go through teams. And he can do that at the WHL. And you see that all the time. He'll just cut through defenses. And look, in that league, he's playing against 17, 18-year-olds, 15-year-olds who are not fully developed like he is. And he can get away with that. But as we saw, I mean, his one injury was in the WHL playoffs. Definitely when the physicality was going to be taken to another level. And then when he got to development camp even, he got crushed in his own zone. And it's an unfortunate hit, just bad place, wrong time. Not a lot fault of his own, but he got crushed, and his lack of size sort of got exposed. And unfortunately, you have a player coming into the AHL and into his possible NHL seasons. He's already got an injury history under him. And I'm trying to remember, I think they were both shoulder injuries. I don't know if it was ever confirmed if it was the same shoulder. But even in that case, he's hurt both shoulders already. And that's before walking into the NHL. And, you know, it sounds like I'm talking him down a lot, it sounds like. And I don't want to be like that. I just want to make the point, like, he's not this slam dunk. He is not like a top 5 prospect in the NHL. There's a reason the Sabres were confirmed to be shopping him as the prospect to trade this summer, and why teams seemingly weren't as high on him as we were. That there's things he has to learn in the AHL. He has to learn when to pick his spots and when to not get try to squeeze through two 30-year-old men, trying to cut through them at the blue line, because otherwise he's going to have a bad time.
Yeah, I think that's part of it too, and that, you know, his timeline, it's not, you know, he's not going to be able to make the NHL right away, or he's not going to excel right away in the AHL. He might take a little longer. And that's one of the advantages that Kulich and Rosen have over him. They have a lot of experience at the pro level. Savoie has none. Like, he's played in the juniors. Okay, he played 3 minutes and 50 seconds with the Sabres, and he played 4 playoff games with the Amherst. it's going to take time for him to get into the NHL and to get acclimated. And he still might be an incredible player if he could get through all of that. And I hope he is. I'm not going to root against him. But it's with this timeline, he doesn't really fit in it anymore. And I think using him as our big prospect to trade, and I think he's very league wide known. Like, I think most fan bases know who Matt Savoie is. Like, he's a league wide known. Everybody knew he fell to us. He's been our top prospect for years. And I just think he made sense to be the guy to be moved.
And the upside is still, it's so there. I don't want to talk down his potential. His potential is still through the roof. I'm just trying to talk my way through A, why the Sabres felt they could survive this move, and B, why I just don't think fan perception was as high as how front offices see it. I think they see some of those things. The fact he didn't take off in the WHL probably as much as he should have, and that his World Junior performances haven't been great, and that he has that injury history. Now, he's still an incredibly talented offensive player, still incredibly explosive. It's not like he's blown his knee out and has lost foot speed or anything. It's not like that. The core pieces of his game are still there, and he's going to a team that I think he should be able to contribute. I'm not too sure with how the Edmonton development system is, but Dylan Holloway has seemingly broken into the NHL as a good rookie and contributed in the playoffs, so they might have a good development path set up for him. I think Edmonton fans, if there's any listening, I think you just have to go in with the right mindset. Don't expect this guy to make the roster out of camp and almost fill the hole that McLeod left when he got dealt. That's not who Savoie is right now, and maybe even ever, because JP mentioned it. I think he projects as a winger in the NHL, and he can be a good winger.
Yeah, I did already see some Oilers fans projecting him to be like their third line center or their third line winger this year. And I think, they're overjoyed right now. They just got one of the top prospects in the league for the third line center. But I think, they'll take a step back. He'll be in the AHL, and hopefully he develops really nicely and plays into be a really good player with a really good team, quite frankly. He could fit into that team really well, considering, he's fast, like you said, his explosiveness. That's part of the reason why Edmonton has been so good with some of their speedy guys.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So we wish Matthew Savoie all the best. I'm happy Adams made a deal like this, because because you trade Matthew Savoie, like trading Casey Middlestad is one thing. You could sort of see the writing on the wall for him. Maybe they chose to keep him, but even then, you could totally see the possibility that they were going to trade him. Nothing was forcing Kevyn Adams to trade Matthew Savoie. We saw how shocked the league was as a whole by seeing this trade. This gets the pedigree off Kevyn Adams' back. You can no longer call him a GM that won't trade prospects. He just traded Matthew Savoie. So yep. I'm happy about that, and I'm happy it's for a legitimate good NHL player. How good he's going to be and how they slot him in, it remains to be seen. But, now the question we don't have to talk about the bottom six anymore. The only thing we might have to talk about is if they trade anybody else out of it. Now we can probably turn the conversation. It still probably remains on a top 6 forward, because I still think they should add one. But now the conversation turns to that and, wrapping up stuff with Krebs and getting the Luukkonen contract. We'll see how that goes. I've been saying for some time I could totally see it going to arbitration. But we'll see. Hopefully they get a deal knocked out before then, and we'll see what the Krebs and Malenstein contracts look like. But
I believe Krebs, he didn't go to arbitration, correct?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. It was
he just took his qualifying offer.
That's right. Yep. Good catch.
Which I'm not sure if we know how much it is. I'm not sure about that, but I did find it interesting that Krebs didn't go to arbitration. Like, I don't know. That could mean absolutely nothing, or it could mean something. I don't know.
People were pointing to, none of the top prospects going to camp this week. That could have meant nothing, or hey, it might have. Yeah. Maybe he knew that somebody was on the way out. So
I did not think about it. That's fair.
It could be nothing, or it could be something. So we shall see. But I'm very excited by this move. At the very least, think about it this way: the Sabres did not make the Sabres worse, and they didn't even make the Amherst worse. Because Matthew Savoie has played a combined, 10 games for the Amherst in the past 2 seasons. So, and then, honestly, that's something we can touch on. They absolutely had to move a prospect, even if it was like a prospect for prospect trade. Like, even if you had, I don't know, somebody that just got somebody that just got drafted within the past year, they would have had way too many prospects on the Amherst this year. Like, you would have had Savoie and probably Kulik and Roseanne, Wahlberg, and guys like Nuchev and Constantinius they probably want to get over here. Noah Ostlund. That's like 7 or 8 guys, and you can't prioritize all of their developments at the exact same time. It's impossible. So they had to make a move like this, and they did it. They swung big. They got a legitimate NHL third line center. Like, there's no questions about that. At least on paper.
And one guy, we barely mentioned him. We did get a guy to help our AHL team.
It's true. Former second, I think Tyler Tullio, he was drafted
2020, I believe.
2020.
I think he's had some good. He had a good AHL year last year.
Yeah, he's probably depth for depth for Rochester, but he played for Bakersfield last year at 21 points in 54 games, 26 points in 63 the year before. So he's depth for the AHL team. He's probably not going to impact the NHL roster. But it helps the Amherst. Gives them another nice young piece. Maybe he turns into something. Maybe he's the secret of this deal. He turns into something unexpectedly.
It'll turn into his trade.
The Tyler Tullio trade. I like the sound of that. All right, but I think other than that, for now, I think that's a good place to leave off. I'm trying to think of anything else to really touch on, but hey, we have the rest of the summer to do that. Christian still gotta get Christian's thoughts on this. We still have to unpack the rest of the NHL at some point and their free agency. So, and it impacts our prospect pyramid episode coming up. So it's fun. We got the whole summer to talk about this, and hopefully the Sabres aren't done. I really, if they got a top 6 forward, I think it's a win of an offseason. We're that close. You're that close from a bona fide win of an offseason. You still have to swing big, but despite keeping the D core basically the same, I think if you complete your forward group and make it one of the deepest probably in the league, if you get a legitimate, like if you get a Nikolai Ehlers, like that's one of the deepest lineups I think in the NHL. It would just feel so good. But right now I'm still probably sipping the Kool-Aid, the post trade high. So we'll see how this ages as we get into the summer, and we'll see if Adams speaks about this move soon. So we'll see. We'll see if it's we have the whole rest of the summer to talk about this. I'm excited. It's a fun move at the very least. It's fun to see player movement, like a big prospect for good NHL player trade. It's a good day. It's a good day for any hockey fan.
Yeah, it's good discourse. It's something exciting to talk about. I don't think we had any plans to talk about the Sabres moves this weekend.
In a positive light.
Yeah, it's really in a positive light.
We're just going to talk about more prospects, the prospect camp.
Yeah. So I think at the very least, it gives us a jolt to the Sabres fan base. A positive one for some, maybe negative if you really like Savoie. But at least, I know I said this last week and you guys didn't like it, but at least like Kevin did something. Like he's not done. He's making moves.
Now it's legitimate. Now he did something. He traded a top prospect to fill a need. Like, you can't take that away from him. Even in a worst case scenario where Ryan McLeod doesn't turn into something, like his NHL pedigree, it's there coming into this season. There's no reason this really shouldn't work out. It doesn't mean it's going to. There's no guarantees, but this should work out. And it's nice. Kevin Adams finally has the stigma off his back. He's not willing to trade prospects. And I think it gives merit to the idea he was going through conversations with other teams. He was doing so this whole time. It just, it was frustrating, but the right deal never materialized until now, and he finally pulled the trigger. So, I think with that's going to do it for this emergency episode. Crazy day. Just some closing thoughts. Once again, if you don't like the trade, like if you really like Savoie and you really thought he's going to be a top end prospect, and you're a big hater of McLeod, fine, that's fine. You shouldn't be calling for Kevin Adams' job because of this. Not because of this. I really don't see how that is beneficial, but I don't know. Maybe you think I'm just a naive fan who thinks too highly of a GM.
Naive 20-year-old who hasn't fully suffered this entire drought. But what I mean, our bottom six, 5 new forwards.
That's an
5 new,
overhaul.
so it's a complete overhaul. You can't say Kevin didn't do anything.
No, you can officially say now he did something. He really made a big swing. So, I think with that, that's going to do it for this episode of the Sabre Roundtable. Thank you very much for listening. If you want to follow us on Twitter, follow us at the Sabre Report on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. If you watch this on YouTube, thank you very much for watching. Click like, click subscribe. If you want updates for the pod, you can follow us on Twitter at Sabre Report Pod. As always, go give our friends over at the Buffalo Sports Talk podcast a listen. We'll see how this episode pushes back the next time we meet. But as I said, stay tuned to our Twitter for any updates. I'm sure the three of us will meet in the near future, or perhaps Jesse. I hear some people really want to see him back on. So, thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next time. Feel free to leave a review. And as always, go Sabres.
Go Sabres.